If you've ever felt like life has passed you by, like your best years are behind you, or like you've been counted out by those who once believed in you, then hit that like button and subscribe. Because today, I'm going to share a story that proves it's never too late to write your comeback. What you're about to hear isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a blueprint for transformation that anyone can follow. Regardless of your age, your past failures, or how hopeless your situation might seem right now. So get comfortable, turn up the volume, and prepare to discover how the darkest moments of your life can become the foundation for your greatest triumph. This isn't just a story, it's a roadmap back to yourself. The breaking point didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, agonizing erosion, 1,000 tiny cuts that bled me of my confidence, my identity, and finally my will to fight. It began with the phone call from my brother Mark, the one person I thought would always be in my corner. I was sitting in the sterile, beige waiting room of yet another potential investor. A man half my age who looked at me with the kind of pity one reserves for a museum exhibit. The rejection letter, already printed and sitting on his desk, was a formality. At 57, after 3 failed businesses and a divorce that had left me emotionally and financially eviscerated, I was becoming accustomed to the smell of stale coffee and the feeling of being invisible. But this call was different. It was from Mark, my kid brother, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, the one I'd co-signed a loan for to start his own business. "Richard," he said, his voice strained with a syrupy, false sympathy that was more insulting than outright scorn. "I'm calling to let you know that the family has decided to cut you off. We can't keep watching you destroy yourself with these delusions of grandeur. It's time to accept reality and get a real job." The words hit me like physical blows. Delusions of grandeur. The phrase echoed in the silent, air-conditioned room. My own family, my blood had officially convened, discussed my failure, and issued a collective judgment. I was officially a disappointment. I mumbled a thanks for his honesty and ended the call, my hand trembling so violently I could barely slide the phone back into my pocket. The young investor watched me, his expression a mixture of discomfort and relief that he wouldn't have to deliver the bad news himself. That night, sitting alone in my small rented room, the walls seeming to close in on me, I asked myself the question that would haunt me for weeks. Is it too late for me? I had watched the years pass, the dreams fade. The opportunities slipped through my fingers like sand, and I had wondered whether life had already decided my fate. I hid it well, or so I thought, but there were nights when I sat alone in the darkness. The only light coming from my phone, scrolling through old photos of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. And I would feel a fear deeper than failure. It was the fear that my moment had passed, that the best part of my story was already written, and the rest was just epilogue, the true breaking point. The moment the last thread of my resilience snapped came 3 weeks later at my daughter Emily's wedding. I had managed to scrape together enough money from a few odd jobs delivering flyers, assembling furniture for a modest gift, and a rental tuxedo that was slightly too tight in the shoulders and smelled faintly of someone else's cologne. I was determined, at least for one day, to maintain some semblance of dignity for her special day. But as I approached the ornate doors of the reception hall, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers that seemed to mock my current station, my heart sank. There, laughing with the groom's wealthy parents under the soft glow of the chandeliers, was my ex-wife Eleanor. She looked radiant, her hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A diamond bracelet on her wrist that I had certainly never bought her. Beside her stood Mark, my brother, wearing a custom-tailored suit that screamed success, his hand resting proprietorially on the small of Eleanor's back. The sight of them together was a physical blow, a public declaration of my replacement. When they spotted me, their conversation halted, and I watched as Eleanor whispered something to Mark, both of them glancing in my direction with a mixture of pity and contempt, the kind of look one gives a stray dog that has wandered into a fancy party. I straightened the jacket of my rented tux, forcing my shoulders back, and walked toward them with as much confidence as I could muster, which wasn't much. "Richard," Eleanor said coolly, her eyes barely meeting mine before flicking away to scan the room. "I didn't think you'd come. Why wouldn't I come to my daughter's wedding?" I replied, my voice tighter than I intended, the words catching in my throat. Mark stepped forward, a smug little smile playing on his lips, his hand still on Eleanor's shoulder as if to stake his claim. "We just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, surrounded by, well, successful people." The implication was clear, a verbal jab designed to remind me of my place. I was no longer one of them. I was a cautionary tale, a ghost from a life they had all moved on from. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound pathetic, my daughter Emily approached, her face lighting up with a genuine, guarded smile when she saw me. "Dad, you came." She hugged me tightly, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder of why I was there. But then she pulled back, her expression clouded with a concern that was more painful than the outright contempt from Eleanor and Mark. "Dad, are you okay? You look tired." The concern in her eyes was genuine, but it was also laced with something else: embarrassment. I saw it in the quick glance she threw toward her new in-laws, the subtle shift in her posture. She was worried about what her new, wealthy family would think of her down-in-his-luck father. That night, as I sat alone at a table in the back, nursing a warm glass of cheap champagne and watching my daughter dance with her new husband, I felt more alone than ever before in my life. The realization hit me with crushing force. Not only had I failed myself, I had become a source of shame for the person I loved most in the world. I was a liability, a blemish on her perfect day. When I returned to my room that night, the smell of stale air and takeout food filling my lungs, I didn't just feel defeated, I felt erased. My identity had been completely stripped away, replaced by a single, suffocating label: failure. What's in that moment of absolute rock-bottom despair? With the image of my daughter's embarrassed smile burned into my mind, that I stumbled upon an old book I'd purchased years ago during a brief, optimistic flirtation with self-help literature. The book was titled The 5 Principles of Rebirth, and as I flipped through its yellowed, brittle pages, one passage caught my eye. The words seeming to leap off the page and into my soul: "There are no 5 signs it is too late for you. There is only one, and it is death. If you can hear these words, you are not dead. And because you are not dead, you are not finished. Your story is not over. Your hope is not expired. Your future has not been written in final ink." Something inside me shifted as I read those words. It wasn't an immediate cinematic transformation, but a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the thick wall of despair I had built around myself. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than hopelessness. It was a tiny ember of defiance. I decided then and there, not with a grand declaration, but with a quiet, desperate resolve, to commit to the 5 principles outlined in the book, not with the expectation of immediate success, but with the simple determination to reclaim a single shred of my own self-worth. The first principle, beginning each day with a directed mental exercise, felt almost absurd at first. The book suggested spending 10 minutes each morning in complete silence, deliberately directing one's thoughts toward the desired outcome. Rather than allowing the default programming of worry and doubt to dominate the day, as a man who had spent his entire adult life believing that action was everything and introspection was for the weak, this practice initially felt like a waste of precious time. Time that could be spent sending out more resumes or making more calls. My first few attempts were clumsy and unfocused. I would sit cross-legged on my worn, lumpy mattress, the sounds of my sister's family getting ready for their day filtering through the thin walls, and my mind would race with a cacophony of anxieties: the unpaid credit card bills, the mounting debt, the ever-present fear of homelessness, the look on my daughter's face. "This is nonsense," I muttered after one particularly frustrating session, my knee aching from the awkward position. But something kept me coming back to that worn book each night, and to the meditation each morning. Perhaps it was the sheer desperation of my situation, or perhaps it was the faintest glimmer of hope that the author, a man named Raymond Hollywell, I might know something I didn't about the architecture of the mind. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the practice began to work its magic. I learned to quiet the chaos, to observe the anxious thoughts without letting them hijack my entire being. I learned to replace the voice of doubt with a vision of the man I wanted to become: calm, focused, purposeful. I began each day by declaring, not just thinking, but speaking aloud in a whisper. Today, I command my mind to be my ally. I think with direction. I speak with order. I act with confidence. At first, the words felt hollow, like a child's incantation. But repetition gradually gave them substance, like water slowly carving stone. After about 2 weeks of this practice, I noticed a subtle but significant shift in my daily experience. I was calmer in the face of rejections, more focused in my actions, and less reactive to the slights and judgments of others. The world hadn't changed, but my relationship to it had. I was beginning to understand that the external circumstances of my life were less important than my internal state of being. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating, because it meant I had more control over my experience than I had believed. Terrifying, because it meant I was ultimately responsible for my own suffering as well as my joy. One morning, about a month in, I was sitting in my usual spot. The first rays of a pale sun filtering through the dusty blinds, when I had a breakthrough. Instead of just reciting the words, I actually felt them. I pictured myself navigating a difficult phone call with grace, not desperation. I envisioned myself finishing a task with a sense of accomplishment, not just relief. I felt the confidence not as an idea, but as a physical sensation in my chest, a warmth, a steadiness. That day I had 3 job interviews. I would have been a nervous wreck, my voice shaky, my answers desperate. But on this day I was different. I was calm. I wasn't pretending to be a successful businessman. I was simply a man who was in control of his own mind. I didn't get any of the jobs, but for the first time in a long time, I walked out of the interviews not feeling defeated, but feeling like I had presented my authentic self. That feeling was worth more than any job offer. The second principle, studying the philosophy of achievement daily, proved equally transformative, though in a different way. The book emphasized that the mind, like the body, grows weak without nourishment. I had always considered myself a lifelong learner, but I realized that my reading had become scattered and unfocused, driven by momentary interests or the latest business trend rather than intentional growth. I made a commitment to read for 30 minutes each day, not just anything, but materials that would strengthen my understanding of success principles. I revisited classics I had read years ago: Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, James Allen's As a Man Thinketh, and Halliwell's Working with the Law. This time, however, I wasn't reading for intellectual stimulation or to find a magic bullet. I was reading for internalization. I took notes, reflected on how each principle applied to my current situation, and looked for ways to implement these ideas in my daily life. I discovered that knowledge without application is merely entertainment, but knowledge applied becomes wisdom. One principle that particularly resonated with me was Hill's concept of the mastermind alliance, the idea that no great achievement is accomplished alone. This was challenging for me as my recent experiences had made me wary of trusting others. The betrayal by my business partner had cut deep, and my family's abandonment had reinforced the idea that I was on my own. But I forced myself to reach out to old colleagues, not asking for handouts or jobs, but seeking counsel and connection. To my surprise, a few of them responded positively. One former business partner, a man named David with whom I had lost touch over the years, agreed to meet for coffee. He was now a successful consultant, and as I shared my story, my successes, my failures, and my commitment to rebuilding my life using the 5 principles, I watched his expression shift from sympathy to admiration. "Richard," he said, leaning forward with intensity, "what you're describing isn't just a comeback, it's a transformation. It's a mindset you're building is more valuable than any single business idea." He shared insights about industry trends that I had completely missed while wallowing in self-pity. He didn't offer me a job, but he offered something far more valuable: perspective. Reminded me that my experience, even my failures, had value. Another contact from my networking group introduced me to a weekly meet of entrepreneurs who met to share challenges and solutions, not to brag about their successes. These connections didn't immediately translate into financial gain, but they did something more valuable. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in my struggles, and that others had found their way back from similar defeats. The daily study habit became my anchor, a constant in a life that felt adrift. Even on days when nothing seemed to go right, I knew I could count on those 30 minutes of focused learning to restore my perspective and renew my determination. I wasn't just reading words on a page. I was actively reprogramming my mind, replacing the corrupted software of doubt and fear with the operating system of faith and possibility. The third principle, recording 3 to 6 chief aims for the day, initially struck me as overly simplistic. Almost childish, as someone who had spent years creating complex business plans and strategic documents with Gantt charts and financial projections. The idea of limiting myself to just a few daily tasks seemed absurd. But I decided to follow the principle exactly as described in the book, writing down no more than 6 specific aims each morning. At first, my aims were modest, born from a place of near total inertia. Apply for 3 jobs, contact 2 old colleagues, update my resume, go for a 20-minute walk. They were small, but they were mine. They were a declaration that I was not going to be passive. But as I began to experience small success as a response to an application, a pleasant coffee meeting, my aims became more ambitious. Research. 3 potential business opportunities in the renewable energy sector. Draft a 1-page outline for a new consulting service. Schedule 1 meeting with a potential mentor. What I discovered was profound. The act of writing down these aims each morning created a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing from my life. Instead of waking up with a vague sense of anxiety about all the things I needed to do, I began each day with clarity about what would move me closest to my goals. The practice also revealed something important about my previous approach to work. I had often confused busyness with productivity. In my earlier business ventures, I had filled my days with countless tasks, checking emails endlessly, attending pointless meetings, micromanaging employees, many of which had little impact on my ultimate objectives. By limiting myself to just 3 to 6 aims, I was forced to prioritize what truly mattered. This focus created momentum. Each completed aim, no matter how small, built confidence for the next, creating a positive feedback loop that gradually restored my sense of agency and competence. After about a month of this practice, I noticed that I was accomplishing more in a single day than I previously had in a week. Not because I was working harder, but because I was working smarter, with greater intention and purpose. The simple act of ticking off a box on my notepad brought a jolt of dopamine, a small reward that my brain craved. It was a tangible record of progress, a weapon against the feeling of stagnation that had plagued me for so long. The fourth principle, examining thoughts, its actions and failures each night, was perhaps the most challenging for me. I had always been a forward-looking person, more focused on what was next than what had just happened. The idea of spending 15 minutes each night reviewing my day felt uncomfortable, even indulgent, but I committed to the practice, sitting in the quiet of my small room each evening with a simple notebook, answering 3 questions. What did I think today? What did I do? What must I correct? The first few nights were brutal. I became acutely aware of how often my thoughts drifted toward negativity, how frequently I allowed minor setbacks to derail my progress, and how many excuses I made for not following through on my commitments. I saw patterns of self-sabotage that I had been blind to. For example, I noticed that I tended to procrastinate on tasks that required me to reach out to others, a pattern that clearly stemmed from my fear of rejection after months of job hunting. I also observed that my energy and productivity were highest in the morning, yet I often wasted this precious time on trivial tasks like checking emails or scrolling through news websites, a form of digital self-medication to numb the anxiety. But as I continued this practice, something remarkable began to happen. I started to recognize these patterns in real time. I would catch myself just as I was about to open a browser tab to check the news, and I would consciously redirect my attention to the first aim on my list. These nightly reflections became a powerful tool for self-correction. The turning point came at a clean energy conference in San Francisco, where we were invited to present our technology. I was nervous, knowing that several people from my previous business world would be in attendance, including my brother Mark, who had recently joined a venture capital firm specializing in energy investments. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of hundreds of industry professionals, I spotted Mark in the third row, looking bored and impatient, scrolling through his phone. For a moment, the old insecurities threatened to resurface. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, but then I remembered the daily mental exercise that had become my anchor. Today I command my mind to be my ally. I think with direction. I speak with order. I act with confidence. I took a deep breath, the way I had practiced 1,000 times in my small room, and began our presentation. I didn't just talk about the technology. I told our story. I spoke about the journey, the challenges we had overcome, the lessons we had learned, and our vision for a sustainable future. I spoke with a passion and authenticity that came from having been to the brink and back. As I spoke, I noticed Mark's expression shift from boredom to interest, then to shock as he realized the quality and potential of what we were building. He put his phone down, his eyes locked on me. By the end of our presentation, the entire room was captivated. After our presentation, several investors approached us, including Mark. "Richard," he said, extending his hand with a mixture of surprise and something that looked suspiciously like respect. "I had no idea you were working on something this impressive. We at the firm would be interested in learning more." I shook his hand calmly, maintaining eye contact. "Thank you, Mark. We're always interested in talking with potential partners who share our vision." The old Richard would have been desperate for his brother's approval and investment. But the new Richard understood that our value wasn't determined by Mark's opinion or his firm's interest. We had multiple options, and more importantly, we had a clear sense of our own worth and direction. We ultimately accepted investment from a firm that aligned with our values, not just our financial projections. Over the next 18 months, our company, which we named Aura Energy, grew at a staggering pace. We secured additional funding rounds, built a world-class team, and began commercial deployments of our technology. I found myself traveling internationally, meeting with government officials and corporate leaders who were excited about our solution. The man who had been living in a rented room, rejected by his family and written off by his industry, was now at the forefront of the renewable energy revolution, the climax of my transformation in the sweetest form of revenge came at an industry award ceremony 2 years after I had begun my journey of rebuilding. Our company, Aura Energy, had been nominated for the Innovation of the Year award. I was invited to accept on behalf of our team. As I walked toward the stage to receive the award, the spotlights warm on my face, the sound of applause washing over me. I scanned the room and saw several familiar faces. There was my ex-wife, Eleanor, looking older and less vibrant than I remembered, her smile a little too tight. There was Mark, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read, a complex cocktail of shock, envy, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of pride. And there in the front row was Emily, my daughter, her face beaming with an unadulterated pride that was the only validation I had ever truly craved. As I stood at the podium, the heavy crystal award in my hand, I felt a surge of emotion, not triumph or vindication, but a profound, overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The MC handed me the microphone, and the room fell silent. "They say that success is the best revenge," I began, my voice steady, despite the emotion welling inside me. "But I've learned that the sweetest revenge isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right. It's becoming the person you were meant to be, regardless of the obstacles, regardless of the opinions of others, regardless of how many times you've fallen." I looked directly at Mark as I continued. "There was a time when I believed that my value was determined by external markers, wealth, status, the approval of others. When I lost those things, I thought I had lost everything. But what I discovered was that my true worth was never dependent on those external factors. It was always there, waiting to be rediscovered and reclaimed." I paused, gathering my thoughts, my eyes finding Emily's in the crowd. "The greatest revenge isn't about making others regret their treatment of you. It's about becoming so whole, so authentic, so aligned with your purpose that their opinions no longer matter. It's about building a life so meaningful that the past loses its power over you. As I concluded my speech, the room erupted in applause. I saw Mark stand hesitantly, then join in the clapping, his expression unreadable. Eleanor looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. But Emily was on her feet, cheering loudly, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized that my revenge had never been about them. It had been about reclaiming myself. The 5 principles that had guided my transformation hadn't just rebuilt my career. They had reconstructed my identity from the inside out. The aftermath of that awards ceremony brought several unexpected encounters that completed the circle of my transformation. The first came when Mark approached me as I was leaving the stage, the award still heavy in my hand. "Richard, that was impressive," he said, extending his hand. "I had no idea you were capable of this kind of comeback." I shook his hand, noting the surprise in his expression. People are capable of remarkable things when they stop listening to limitations and start listening to possibilities, I replied evenly. "Would you be open to discussing investment opportunities?" he asked, his business instincts clearly overriding any personal reservations. "We're always open to discussing partnerships with those who share our vision and values," I responded, maintaining professional courtesy while subtly reminding him that the power dynamic had shifted. "Have your people contact my team?" As I walked away, I felt not triumph but a quiet satisfaction. The brother who had dismissed me as a failure was now seeking to invest in my success. The second encounter came later that evening when Eleanor intercepted me on my way to the bar. "Richard, I never imagined," she began, her voice trailing off as she struggled to find the right words. "Life takes unexpected turns," I finished for her, my tone gentle but firm. "I'm happy for your success," she said, her eyes searching mine for something, perhaps regret, perhaps a glimmer of the connection we once shared. "Thank you, Eleanor. I wish you well too." As I continued on my way, I realized that I felt no bitterness toward her. It's only a quiet recognition that our paths had diverged for a reason. The final and most meaningful encounter happened when Emily found me in a quiet corner of the reception hall. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel ashamed or disappointed." I pulled her into a hug, feeling years of tension dissolve between us. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. Your father had to get lost before he could find his way back. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere again." In that moment, holding my daughter and feeling her unconditional love and support, I understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't the award, the recognition, or even the financial prosperity. It was the restoration of relationships that mattered, the healing of wounds that had once seemed incurable, and the opportunity to be the father my daughter deserved. Looking back on my journey from rock bottom to remarkable comeback, I've come to understand that revenge, when properly conceived, isn't about hurting others, but about healing yourself. The 5 principles that guided my transformation weren't just tools for rebuilding my career, they were practices for reconstructing my identity from the CE, foundation up. The directed mental exercise taught me that I am the master of my thoughts, not their servant. The daily study of achievement philosophy reminded me that wisdom is cumulative and that every great builder stands on the shoulders of those who came before. The practice of recording daily aims showed me that clarity comes from simplicity, and that progress is built one focused day at a time. The nightly examination of thoughts, actions, and failures helped me understand that self-awareness is the foundation of self-mastery, and the Mastermind Alliance demonstrated that we are never truly alone. When we have the courage to reach out and connect authentically with others, what I've learned is that it's never too late to begin again. Regardless of your age, your past failures, or how hopeless your situation might seem, the world may have written you off, but as long as you have breath, you have the power to write a new chapter. Your story isn't over until you say it is. The revenge that truly satisfies isn't about making others regret their treatment of you, it's about becoming so whole, so authentic, so aligned with your purpose, that their opinions no longer have power over you. It's about building a life so meaningful that the past loses its ability to define your present or determine your future. As I stand today, leading a company that's making a real difference in the world. Surrounded by people who believe in me and supported by a family that's been healed and restored, I understand that the greatest revenge isn't success, it's significance. It's not just about what you accomplish, but who you become in the process. The call came from Dr. Eris Thorne, our lead engineer in Southeast Asia. The project in the Mekong Delta was our flagship installation, a testament to our commitment to bringing clean energy to developing regions. It was the project I pointed to in every speech, the embodiment of Aura's new, purpose-driven mission. But Eris's voice, usually calm and measured, was tight with a controlled panic I could feel through the thousands of miles of fiber optic cable. "Richard," he began, skipping any pleasantries, "we have a problem. A cascading thermal feedback loop in the battery array. It's not dangerous, not an explosion risk, but it's causing accelerated degradation of the core components. In 6 months, maybe less, the entire multi-million-dollar installation will be useless. And the chemical byproducts, they're leaching into the soil at a rate far above our projections. It's not toxic, but it's altering the pH. Richard, it's killing the mangroves." My blood ran cold. The mangroves were the entire ecological reason for the project's location. We had promised to power the region and preserve its delicate ecosystem. We had failed on the second, more important, count. The next 72 hours were a blur of frantic video calls and sleepless nights. The news was worse than we thought. It wasn't a flaw in our manufacturing. It was a fundamental design oversight, a rare interaction between the local humidity and our cooling system that our simulations had failed to predict. It was my fault. I had been the one to champion the accelerated timeline, pushing the team to deploy before the full long-term environmental impact studies were complete. In my eagerness to prove our new ethical model, I had cut the same corner I would have cut in my old ruthless days. The irony was suffocating. The board meeting was a bloodbath. The old Richard would have been in his element, spinning, deflecting, strategizing a way to contain the damage and protect the stock price. But the new Richard felt sick to his stomach. "We have to issue a full, transparent disclosure," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "We have to halt all deployments immediately, recall the affected units, and create a remediation fund for the Mekong Delta. It will be expensive. It will be humiliating. But it is the only thing we can do." The silence in the room was deafening. It was Mark, my brother, who broke it. He had weaseled his way onto the board through a minority shareholder investment, a constant thorny reminder of my past. "Are you insane, Richard?" He scoffed. "You're talking about torching $1 billion in market cap. For what? Some mangroves and a guilty conscience? We can manage this. A quiet software patch. A controlled write-down. No one needs to know the full extent." The others nodded in agreement. They were all good people, I knew that. But they were trapped in the same system I had once mastered. Their fiduciary duty was to the shareholders, not the mangroves. "This isn't a negotiation," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "This is who we are. This is what Aura stands for. If we lie about this, we are no different from every other greedy corporation on the planet. We become a fraud." "Then you're a fraud," Mark shot back, "because you're the one who pushed this through. You're the one who will be held responsible. Your ethical brand will be a joke. They'll call you a hypocrite." He was right. They would. The man who rose from the ashes of failure, who preached integrity, would be exposed as a failure once again. The thought was a physical weight on my chest. The breaking point came in a private conversation with Sarah. I had expected her to be my rock, my unwavering ally. But I saw a conflict in her eyes I had never seen before. "Richard, I believe in doing the right thing," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I also believe in the mission. We can do more good for the planet if we survive this. If we go down, the technology dies with us. Someone else, someone less scrupulous, will pick up the pieces. Is that what you want?" Her question hung in the air, a perfect, terrible dilemma. It was the classic for the greater good argument, a slippery slope I knew all too well. If we sacrifice our principles to survive, Sarah, then the greater good we're fighting for doesn't exist anymore, I said, my heart aching. We can't become the monster to fight the monster. She looked away, and in that moment I knew I was truly alone. The board was against me. The market was against me. And now, my closest partner was wavering. That night, I went back to the beginning. I didn't go to my office or my library. I sat on the floor of my bedroom in the dark, and I did the one thing that had always brought me clarity. I went through the 5 rules, not as a practice, but as a trial. Rule 1. Directed mental exercise. I didn't command my mind to be calm. I let it be chaotic. I let the fear, the shame, the anger wash over me. I saw the headlines, the mocking faces, the destruction of everything I had built. I let the worst-case scenario play out in full, terrifying detail. And then, when the storm had passed, I asked the only question that mattered. Who do I choose to be, right now, in this moment, regardless of the outcome? The answer was immediate and clear. I choose to be the man who tells the truth. Rule 2. Study. I didn't reach for a business book. I pulled out an old collection of letters I had from my grandfather, a man who had run a small, honest hardware store his entire life. I read a line I had underlined years ago: "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches." The words felt less like a platitude and more like a lifeline. Rule 3. Aims. I took out my pen. My aims for the next day were not save the company. They were 1. Tell the full truth. 2. Accept the consequences. 3. Protect the people who work for me as best I can. The company was no longer the aim. The people were. Rule 4. Examination. I looked at my failure. I had been arrogant. I had let my new identity as an ethical leader blind me to the fact that I was still fallible. I had chased the glory of the mission instead of the meticulous, humble work of ensuring it was executed perfectly. This failure was mine to own. Rule 5. Mastermind. I called Professor Harrison. I didn't ask for advice. I simply said, I'm about to lose the company. There was a long pause on the other end. No, Richard, he said, his voice filled with a quiet power. You're about to find out if the company was ever really yours to lose. He understood. He always understood. Climactic revenge payoff. The next day I called a press conference. It was standing room only. I walked to the podium not as a confident CEO, but as a man delivering his own eulogy. I laid out everything. The design flaw, the environmental damage, my personal responsibility for rushing the deployment. I didn't use corporate jargon or spin. I spoke plainly, honestly. I announced the immediate halt of all sales, the full recall of the Mekong Delta units, and the establishment of a $200 million environmental remediation fund, which would wipe out our profits for the next 3 years. I concluded by looking directly into the cameras and saying, Aura Energy was founded on the principle that business could be a force for good. We have failed to live up to that principle. I have failed. There is no excuse. The only thing I can offer now is our complete and total commitment to making this right, whatever the cost. To the people of the Mekong Delta, I am sorry. To our employees and shareholders, I am sorry. I have let you all down. Then I stepped away from the podium and walked out, leaving a firestorm of flashing cameras, and shouted questions in my wake. The aftermath was exactly as brutal as I had imagined. The stock plummeted 80% in 2 days. The board, led by my brother, formally voted to remove me as CEO. The media had a field day, calling me everything from a naive idealist to a corporate hypocrite. I was, once again, a failure. The man who had risen from the ashes had willingly thrown himself back into the fire. But something strange happened amidst the wreckage. A week after my firing, I received an email from a young engineer at Aura, one of the dozens who had been laid off in the subsequent restructuring. It read, Mr. Sterling, I lost my job because of your decision, but I would rather be unemployed working for a man who tells the truth than employed by a company that lies. Thank you. Then another email came from a client in a small African village who had been waiting for an installation. "We are sad your project is delayed," it read, "but we have hope because we know you are a man of your word." The messages trickled in, then became a flood. They weren't from investors or board members. They were from employees, from clients, from ordinary people who had been watching. The final unexpected payoff came 2 months later. I was sitting in a small rented office. The only space I could afford after my personal wealth was decimated, trying to figure out what to do next. The door opened and Sarah Chen walked in. Behind her was Eris Thorne, the engineer from the Mekong Delta, and behind them were a dozen more of our top engineers and scientists. "The board fired you, Richard," Sarah said, a small smile on her face. "They didn't fire us. We quit." She held up a sheaf of papers. "This is a letter of intent from a coalition of impact investors. They were impressed, not by our technology, but by our integrity. They've offered to fund a new venture, a smaller one, a leaner one. One focused solely on perfecting the technology and deploying it ethically, without the pressure of quarterly earnings. We want you to lead us, but only if you promise to never, ever sacrifice the mission for the money again." I looked at their faces, at the hope and determination in their eyes. I had lost the company, the title, the money. But I had somehow gained something far more valuable. I had earned back their trust. I had built a true legacy, not of bricks and mortar, but of shared purpose and unwavering principle. Reflective wrap-up. I learned that the final revenge was never against my brother or my ex-wife or my old rival. The final, most satisfying revenge was against the shallow, success-obsessed man I used to be. I had to kill him once and for all. And the only way to do that was to be willing to lose everything he held dear. The 5 rules had given me the tools to build a life. The crisis forced me to learn the 6th and most important rule. A life built on principles is the only life worth saving, even if it means losing everything else. I am no longer the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I am the founder of a small, dedicated team working out of a rented office, and I have never been richer. My relationship with Emily is stronger than ever, built on a foundation of mutual respect, not just paternal success. My brother Mark is still on the board of the hollowed-out shell of Aura Energy, a king of an empty castle. And sometimes when I see his picture in the business journal, I don't feel anger or triumph. I just feel a quiet, profound peace. I won the war he never even knew was being fought. The first year after the awards ceremony was a blur of champagne and headlines. I was the darling of the business world, the living embodiment of the American dream. Version 2.0. Every major publication wanted my story. I was invited to speak at conferences around the globe where I would tell the tale of my downfall and resurrection, always ending with the 5 rules that had saved me. The audience would applaud, their faces filled with admiration and hope, and I would soak it in. It was a potent drug, this external validation. It was the antithesis of the shame I had felt for years. I began to crave it. The 5 rules, once my sacred lifeline, started to feel like a script I was performing for others. The morning mental exercise became a quick, 3-minute affirmation before checking my stock price. The daily study was replaced with scrolling through my own press clippings. The written names became a checklist of meetings and media appearances. The nightly self-examination was often skipped, placed by a celebratory dinner or a networking event where I was the center of attention. In my mastermind alliance with Professor Harrison, I started canceling our meetings, telling myself I was too busy, that I had graduated from needing that kind of guidance. I had made it. I was the master now. The first crack in the facade appeared during a meeting with my co-founder, Sarah Chen. We were in her lab, a place that used to hum with the raw energy of innovation. But that day, the energy felt flat. "Richard," she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious, "we need to talk about the direction of the company." I leaned back in my expensive leather chair, a gift from a board member, and smiled. "Of course, are the new funding rounds going well? Because my contacts are saying we could be looking at a valuation that would make us one of the top 3 players in the space." She shook her head, her dark eyes filled with a frustration I hadn't seen before. "This isn't about valuation. It's about vision. Remember why we started this? To change the world, to make a real impact on climate change. Lately, all you talk about in leadership meetings is market share, PR, and our stock price. You sound like them. She didn't have to elaborate. Them was the old guard, the corporate sharks I had once despised. Her words stung, but my ego was a well-fortified castle by then. Sarah, that's how you win. That's how you scale. We have to play the game to change the game, she said, standing up. That's how you become the game. And if that's what we're becoming, then I'm not sure I want to play anymore. She walked out, leaving me alone in the sterile lab, the hum of the machinery suddenly sounding like a warning. The second crack came from my daughter. Emily, we were having dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, a place I could now afford without a second thought. I was telling her about a potential acquisition offer from a massive energy conglomerate, a deal that would make me personally wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. It's a life-changing amount of money, Em, I said, my voice buzzing with excitement. You'd never have to work again. Neither would I. She looked at me, her expression not with excitement, but with a quiet concern that was far more unsettling. Dad, she said softly, do you remember that night in my old apartment when you told me you were starting over? You had that little notebook and you were so focused, so present. You were more alive that night, with nothing than I've seen you in months, with everything. I was speechless. What are you saying? I'm saying I miss my dad, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm proud of your success, I really am. But this man in the expensive suit, talking about mergers and acquisitions, I don't know him. He seems tired. Her words were a physical blow. The one person whose opinion I truly valued, the one I had done this all for, saw through the gilded armor to the hollow man inside. The breaking point, however, came from a ghost from my past. I was at a charity gala, accepting another meaningless award when I saw him across the room. It was Marcus Thorne, the business partner, who had embezzled millions from my first company. The man whose betrayal had set my entire downfall in motion. He looked older, his hair thinner, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had once been powerful. Our eyes met, and for a moment I felt that old, familiar surge of hatred. But he didn't look away in shame. He gave me a small, knowing smile, and then he walked over. Richard, he said, his voice smooth as ever. Congratulations. It's good to see you've landed on your feet. I was about to deliver a cutting remark, a final verbal jab to cement my victory, but he spoke first. I see a lot of myself in you right now, he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. The success, the adoration. It's a powerful drug. Enjoy it. But don't forget that it's a high, not a home. I learned that the hard way. He nodded once, a strange gesture of shared, bitter experience, and then he disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, the award suddenly feeling heavy and cold in my hand. He hadn't come to gloat. He had come to deliver a warning. He, my greatest enemy, had seen the truth about me that I had been hiding from myself. I had become him. I had achieved the external victory of my revenge, but in doing so, I was losing the internal war for my own soul. That night, I went home not to my penthouse, but to the old neighborhood. I sat in my car, looking at the small, shabby house where I had rented that room years ago. The memory of that time, the pain, the desperation, the clarity of purpose, it all came flooding back. I remembered the feeling of the worn book in my hands, the 5 rules that had been my only light in the darkness. I realized then that I hadn't just abandoned the rules. I had abandoned the man who needed them. I had traded the raw, authentic struggle for a polished, hollow victory. The revenge wasn't about beating Marcus Thorne or proving my brother wrong. The real revenge was becoming the man I was meant to be. I was failing. The next morning, for the first time in over a year, I woke up before the sun. I sat on the floor of my sprawling, empty living room, just as I had in that cramped room, and I began again. The first rule, the directed mental exercise. It was harder this time. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was filled with the noise of my own ego. my own distractions. But I pushed through. I commanded my mind to be my ally. I declared my purpose not to be a successful CEO, but to be a man of integrity, a man of substance, a man my daughter could be proud of. I felt a flicker of the old fire. The second rule, daily study. I pulled Hollywell's Working with the Law from a dusty shelf in my library, the pages now soft from years of use. I read the same passages I had read in the depths of my despair, but this time they had a new meaning. They weren't just tools for a comeback. They were principles for a life. The third rule, recording my aims. I took out a pen and paper and wrote, not call the board about the acquisition, but have an honest conversation with Sarah. Not review PR strategy, but take Emily to lunch. No phones. The fourth rule, nightly examination. That night, I faced the man in the mirror and asked the hard questions. What did I think today? I thought about my image. What did I do? I chased validation. What must I correct? I must reconnect with my purpose. The fifth rule, the Mastermind Alliance. I called Professor Harrison. Professor, I said, my voice thick with emotion, I need to meet. I think I'm starting over. He didn't say I told you so. Simply said, I'll put the coffee on. The climax of this new battle wasn't a public spectacle. It was a series of private, difficult conversations. The first was with Sarah. I didn't offer excuses. I laid my soul bare. I told her about my conversation with Emily, about seeing Marcus Thorne, about the hollow feeling in my chest. I apologized for losing sight of our vision. I proposed a new plan, one that would turn down the lucrative acquisition offer in favor of a partnership with a nonprofit focused on bringing our technology to underserved communities. It was a move that would cost us millions in the short term, but would realign us with our original mission. To my immense relief, a slow smile spread across her face. Welcome back, Richard, she said. The second conversation was with my board. It was a brutal fight. They accused me of emotionalism, of betraying my fiduciary duty. But this time, I wasn't fighting for my ego. I was fighting for my soul. I stood my ground, using the clarity and focus I had rediscovered through the 5 rules, and I won. The final conversation was with Emily. I took her not to a fancy restaurant, but for a walk in the park where I used to take her as a child. I didn't make promises. I just talked. I told her I was sorry that I had gotten lost, but that I was finding my way back. She just hugged me a long, tight hug that said more than words ever could. Reflective wrap-up. I learned that there is a 6th rule, one that isn't written in any book but is etched into the fabric of a meaningful life. It is the rule of return. It is the understanding that success is not a destination you arrive at, but a path you must walk every single day. The 5 rules are not a cure for life's challenges. They are a daily practice for navigating them. The revenge I had sought against others had been a shallow, temporary satisfaction. The true lasting victory was the ongoing, internal war against my own complacency, my own ego, my own tendency to seek the easy comfort of external validation over the hard work of internal integrity. I didn't walk away from the company or the success. I simply redefined it. Aura Energy is still a leader in the industry, but our mission is now our North Star, not our market cap. I am still the CEO, but my focus is on our people and our purpose, not our press coverage. I still have the penthouse and the nice suits, but they no longer define me. They are just things. The real prize is the quiet peace I feel when I wake up each morning. The clarity of my daily aims, the depth of my conversations with Sarah and Professor Harrison, and the easy, authentic laughter I share with my daughter. The man who sought revenge against the world found himself by learning to make peace with himself. And in that, I found a victory far sweeter than any applause or award. His name was Leo Vance. He was a prodigy, a whirlwind of intellectual energy and raw ambition that I hadn't seen since I was his age. He came to us from MIT with a mind that could slice through complex problems like a hot knife, through butter and a charisma that could charm the funding from a stone. I saw in him a reflection of my younger, hungrier self, and I took him under my wing. Pouring all my knowledge and experience into him, I saw him as the future, the man who would take the Sterling Institute to heights I could only dream of, assuring my philosophy would endure long after I was gone. For 2 years it was perfect. Leo was my star pupil, my protege, my legacy in the making. The first tremor of the coming earthquake was a research paper Leo published, without my final review. It was brilliant, a revolutionary approach to battery efficiency. But the conclusion, buried in the appendix, was a quiet academic argument for rapid, aggressive commercialization, a stark contrast to our slow, methodical, open-source philosophy. When I asked him about it, he was deferential but firm. "Richard, the climate crisis isn't going to wait for our perfect ethical process," he said, his eyes blazing with conviction. "We have a technology here that could change the world in 5 years. Our current model will take 20. At that point, what are we even saving?" I dismissed it as youthful impatience, a fire that needed to be channeled, not extinguished. I was wrong. The full-scale assault came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Leo, now the head of our advanced research team, stood up and presented a proposal so audacious it left the room speechless. He wanted to spin off a new for-profit company, owned by the Institute, but operated outside our ethical constraints. This new entity would license our most cutting-edge technology, aggressively patent it, and partner with major corporations the ones we had once disdained to deploy it at maximum speed. "We can fund 100 new projects like this one with the profits," he argued, his voice ringing with passion. "We can be the cure, not just the prayer. We can do more good by being a little ruthless for a decade than by being pure for a century." He was challenging the very foundation of everything I had built. He was calling my life's work slow, naive, and ultimately irresponsible. The room was divided. The older scientists, my contemporaries, were aghast. But the younger researchers, the ones who had grown up in a world of disruptive startups and move fast and break things ethos, were intrigued. They saw Leo not as a heretic, but as a visionary. I saw my legacy, my perfect kingdom, beginning to fracture from within. The old Richard, the CEO, the warrior, would have crushed him. I would have used my authority, my influence, and my political capital to destroy the proposal and humiliate the challenger. But that man was supposed to be dead. I was the mentor, the philosopher. My weapons were wisdom and principle, not power. And for the first time, I wondered if they were enough. I went back to the 5 rules, but they felt different. They felt like a comfortable old blanket, warm and familiar, but no longer a suit of armor. Rule 1, directed mental exercise. I tried to command my mind to peace, but it was filled with a storm of doubt. Was Leo right? Had I built a comfortable, self-congratulatory club instead of an engine for change? Was my integrity just an excuse to avoid the hard, messy choices of real-world impact? The question haunted me. Rule 2. Study. I read the books on my shelf, but they felt like ancient history. The world had changed. The problems were more urgent. The lines between good and evil, for profit and for good, were blurrier than ever. Rule 3. Aims. My daily aims became a struggle. 1. Defeat Leo's proposal. 2. Rally the board. 3. Protect the Institute. But they felt defensive, small, and reactive. I was playing defense, trying to protect what I had, not advance what we could be. Rule 4. Examination. I examined my own heart, and I found a terrifying emotion: fear. I was afraid of being proven wrong. I was afraid of my legacy becoming a footnote, a noble but failed experiment. I was afraid of becoming irrelevant. I had become a king, and like all kings, I was now terrified of the revolution. Rule 5. Mastermind. I called Professor Harrison. He listened patiently, as always. "Richard," he said when I was done, "you built the Institute on the principle that integrity is the highest form of efficiency. You believed that a strong foundation, built without compromise, would ultimately build the highest and strongest structure in the end. Do you still believe that?" His question was a mirror, and I didn't like the man I saw in it. Climactic revenge payoff. The day of the final board vote, I walked into the room not as a king defending his castle, but as a man laying his soul bare. Leo had just finished his presentation, and the energy in the room was electric. He had won them over with his passion, his logic, and his promise of results. I could see it in their eyes. They were going to vote with him. I had lost. I walked to the podium, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I didn't have a slide deck. I didn't have charts. I only had a story. "I'm not going to argue with Leo's numbers," I began, my voice quiet but steady. "He's right. His way is probably faster. It's probably more efficient in the short term. It's probably the way the world works now." I paused, looking at the young, ambitious faces in the room. "I want to tell you a story about the last time I chose the fast way." And I told them everything. I told them about the Mekong Delta, the mangroves, the design flaw I ignored in my rush to succeed. I told them about the gut-wrenching choice to walk away from my company, to sacrifice everything I had built, because my integrity was all I had left. I told them about the hollow feeling of victory and the long, slow, painful process of building something real on the ashes of my ambition. I didn't frame it as a story of heroism. I framed it as a story of failure. A failure of arrogance. A failure of believing that the ends justify the means. "Leo's way is my old way," I concluded, my eyes finding Leo's in the front row. "It's seductive. It promises the world, and it might even deliver it for a while. But it's a path built on a flaw. It teaches that the mission is more important than the method, and that is a lie that will eventually rot the entire structure from the inside out. This institute. It's not just about making batteries. It's about proving that there's another way to win. A way that doesn't require you to sacrifice your soul on the altar of progress. We are not just trying to save the world. We are trying to save how we save the world. That is our real mission. If you vote for Leo's plan, you will probably get faster results. But you will lose the one thing that makes us special. You will lose the reason we exist in the first place." I stepped away from the podium and sat down, having said my piece. I had not tried to win. I had only tried to teach. The rest was up to them. The vote was close. It was the oldest member of the board, a quiet physicist who had never said a word in these meetings, who broke the tie. She voted against Leo's plan. "Not because of my speech," she said later, "but because it reminded her of why she had joined the Institute in the first place." Leo was shattered. He saw it not as a philosophical victory, but as a personal defeat. He packed his office, preparing to leave. I went to him. "Don't go," I said. "Your fire is a gift. Don't waste it." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and confusion. "You just destroyed my dream," he said. "No," I replied softly. "I just asked you to consider if it was the right one. Your ambition is a powerful engine. It just needs a better chassis, a more ethical one." I offered him a new role, not as a head of a department, but as a chief disruption officer, a man whose job it was to constantly challenge our assumptions, to push us to be faster and more effective, but always within our ethical framework. He was to be our conscience, our internal critic, the man who would prevent us from becoming complacent. He looked at me for a long time, and then slowly he nodded. In that moment, I learned the final, most important rule. A legacy is not a monument to be protected, polished, and preserved against all challengers. A legacy is a flame. It is not yours to own. It is yours to tend, and then, when the time is right, to pass on to the next generation, so they can make it burn brighter than you ever could. My final victory wasn't in defeating my enemy. It was in mentoring him, and in doing so, ensuring that the philosophy I had bled for would not die with me, but would live on, challenged, tested, and ultimately made stronger by the very fire that sought to consume it. This is the true end of my story. The rest will be written by others, by people like Leo, by the next generation of builders who will take the flame and carry it forward. If this 5-part journey has meant something to you, if you've seen a piece of your own struggle and mine, then you know what to do. Hit that like button one last time. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this final chapter. And leave